I'm sure you've all heard the old saying, new year, new me, but what if I say no? Embrace who you are, new year, new country. Roll the intro. Hello there, I'm Rafael de Furia, back at it again for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and this week I wanted to jump into the topic because there are so many people that after this past few years, they're ready to make the jump into living life in a new country, in living abroad. And having lived abroad for more than a decade at this point, well, actually a bit more, significantly more than a decade at this point, I wanted to share some of my insights, some of what I've learned over the years to hopefully help some of you who are thinking about taking that step. But just before we get into this episode, I have a quick question for those of you watching or listening in. If you're listening to this as an audio-only podcast, feel free to come on over to YouTube. The question is, where is it that you are thinking about investing yourself? I use the word investing for a very specific reason, and that's something that I'm going to get into towards the end of the episode, because being located in another place, it's not just about living there. It's about investing your time, investing your life into a new location. But with my first point that I want to get into, as we've gone over in a number of episodes of Not Your Average Globetrotter, living abroad isn't for everybody. And because I've gone over it before, I'm not going to go into it too extensively in this episode. But there is something that I want to add to what I've said before, that there are a lot of people who have traveled very extensively. They've seen the world, they've gone around, they've done things, they've been places, and maybe they've been in one place for an extended period of time, or maybe they've done a few weeks here, a few weeks there, and spent years abroad doing that. But visiting a place or having a lack of permanence in a place does not allow you to have the proper experience of what it is like to live there full time within reality. Even a place like Portugal, maybe you're thinking about getting one of the new digital nomad visas, or you're already here, or you've spent a little bit of time, or you're thinking about some other country where you can either live long term or become a digital nomad. But the reality is that when you are living your day-to-day life, there are some differences that you just do not go through when you are there for a very short period of time. Something else that I would say is also very important to understand is your motivation, the reason why it is that you want to live in a different place, as well as, I would say, not necessarily your willingness to envelop yourself in a new culture, but how able you are to take that on. Because many people who are living abroad will want to go through these experiences and learn and have these new things around them. But for some people, all of this newness can actually be very difficult and become something that weighs on them heavily. So it's not about how willing you are, it's about how able you are. But the next point that I would like to get into would happen a little bit after this. Like, not even you've taken your first step, but you've just lifted your foot off of the ground. You're lifting it up. You're right in the middle of it before you actually get everything. Like, once you've kind of started figuring out at least that part of the puzzle, because that's a very big part of the puzzle, and some things you really can only learn once you're in the moment. But of course, this comes along with, how committed are you to living abroad? Of course, one of my recommendations is that if you are planning to live in another place, go into it with the mindset that you are never going back, almost like you can't go. Like, it's not even an option. If you can somehow put yourself in that mindset, this is the only option, I'm making it work, you will notice a big difference. I have seen a lot of people that if they jump out in the first year or second year, these are some of the most difficult times. Really, I would say amongst most of the people that I've spoken with over the years is that around the 5-year mark seems to really be when it's like you're in that rhythm. You've got things solid enough. It's still in a period where you're getting used to things. After 3 years, though, is really solid. I would say, my personal opinion, that you've got a rhythm going. Like, the first year, you're still figuring things out. The second year, you're kind of able to walk and talk a little bit more like a toddler. And then that third year, you're kind of starting to run around a little bit again. But even that third year is still within that 5-year period. For that first 5 years, I'd say, even from an emotional standpoint, can be quite difficult. But of course, for many people, living abroad full time may not necessarily be the plan. And I'm not going to say there's anything wrong with it, but hey, if you're not going to go big, go home, right? But that's just my opinion. But there are some people who would like to do the digital nomad thing. I mean, again, like here in Portugal, that's opened up a door to many people who would have not had that option opened otherwise. But then also even countries like Italy. I mean, that was supposed to have happened already, but that's something that, like, for those of you who know about the Italian citizenship podcast that I do with attorney Marco Permunian, we've been waiting for updates on that. But of course, I would assume probably with the election and everything, that could be one of the reasons why things have been set back a little bit, and maybe the priorities of this new government could be a little bit different. But let's see what happens, because there are plenty of other countries. I believe even Spain is now talking about something like that. And Southeast Asia, it's been popular for many years. I've had family members who've gone to like Bali and spent time out there. I don't know about the visa situation out there, but there are people who might just want to do a year abroad, 2 years abroad, or some people who might call themselves digital nomads, but spend a longer period of time in one place. But then there's other digital nomads who, like I said before, might just change from place to place every 2 weeks. And I honestly can't imagine something that I would probably hate more. I'm very much happy to have my place where I can have things set up, get into my rhythm of things, have things set up the way that I like them, and just have my routine. And after having lived in different countries and moved more than probably I would have liked, I am very happy to be able to remain in a single place and call it home, have my setup, have my work, have my desk the way I like to do it, and have everything in its place. But of course, as a single person, being able to just make a decision, jump on a plane and go to another part of the world is quite an easy decision to do, and have my space the way that I like it, and have my things in the places that I like, or even have my bed and my ability to stretch out completely. That's very doable as a single person. But if you are moving abroad, for example, with children, then a significant other, or maybe just the significant other, of course, there are going to be decisions and discussions that have to happen, with many considerations and potential consequences that come along with them. Of course, even if you're single, consequences can still come up. And these are things that you have to really look at and try to figure out as much as you can. Of course, like I said before, there are certain things which you can only figure out in the moment. But living in another location brings in new dynamics and challenges, things that you may never have faced before, or that you never would have faced otherwise. And one location may bring different challenges than what another one might bring. And maybe that could be something that could be destructive to a relationship, or it could really help your relation to flourish. And then maybe you go back to your home country and things are not quite the same as they once were. So of course, having as much information as possible ahead of time definitely helps. This is why Not Your Average Globetrotter exists. And of course, I do have to just say a quick thanks to those of you who have been a part of this journey and help this project to be able to continue through the one-time donations, through the thanks button here on YouTube, as well as the one-time donations through rafaeldefuria.com/support, as well as the monthly support through Patreon. Thank you all so very much. Really, thank you for helping this project to be able to continue for the years that it has been going. So, of course, anyway, there are different considerations, and some of these things come with assumptions, and many people might group parts of the world together and start generalizing. In some cases, generalizing can be very detrimental, and I would say try to avoid it whenever possible. But of course, we're human, we're not perfect. Sometimes these things happen. But you may find amongst individuals who are interested in Italy, Spain, and Portugal a bit of crossover, and that they might actually be looking at all three of these countries, or two of the three, or maybe one of the three and another one that's also on the Mediterranean, and grouping these places because of some of the perceived similarities. But sometimes with things that we might think of as being the same or having a lot of shared commonalities, they can be worlds apart. And I would say even that very much goes for Italy and Portugal. Yes, there are some Latin similarities. Yes, there are some Southern European similarities. But at the end of the day, the cultures are extremely different. Even if you generalize, let's say, to another part of the world, like maybe Asia, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines. I know there are people who look at that part of the world and think that maybe the cultures there might be the same. While they may have some similarities, the individuals and the way that people live their life, the way that people move through life, will have its differences. And sometimes we don't necessarily think about these things. And I would say this might especially go for individuals coming from the US, that sometimes because we grow up in the North American bubble, that we don't have exposure to how different things can be, even within the US itself. I mean, think about maybe, again, generalizing, somebody coming from California may be very different than a person who has spent most of their life, or at least come from, maybe a place like Tennessee. You might find somebody in, like, say, Georgia showing you some really warm Southern hospitality, but then you go off to New York and they say, get out of here. So even within a country, you will find differences between people. I can say, even where I live here in Braga, Portugal, in comparison with Lisbon, there are some major differences between the people. The way that people use the language, the accent, or parts of the language. Like in the north, people are very much known for swearing. Like it is very much a part of the culture and the communication style up here. And Braga, for whatever reason, seems to kind of be the capital for swearing. I think it's hilarious. I love it. I really do. People are so real here. But even then, I can also say there's a difference between Braga and Porto. And Porto is much closer to Braga than Lisbon. But again, we're talking about, what, maybe 3.5 hours, 4 hours maximum between Braga and Porto, between Braga and Lisbon. So even though Porto could be like, what, less than an hour to an hour, depending on how you are getting between the cities, you will still even see a difference between the people in Porto and the people in Braga. And even the accents slightly differ. I have a friend who comes from just outside of Porto. It's still kind of part of Porto, Matosinhos. And the way that he speaks, and even his accent, slightly differs from what I've heard from people in Porto. I find it fascinating that these things exist in other parts of the world, whereas especially in the US, our accents have been very much neutralized by television, by modern television, although now some accent specialists, linguists are saying that new accents are developing in different parts of the US. A different discussion for a different day. A little bit of language nerdery, something that I do often enjoy, but not for this video. You have to consider it's not just the way that people talk. The way that people talk is a representation. So if you're thinking about moving to Portugal, the people in Portugal and the way that life works in Portugal is not going to be the same as it works in Spain. Yes, there could be some similarities, and I apologize to the Portuguese who I may offend by saying that. But this is the reality, that you may have more in common with your Spanish neighbors than what somebody from Australia might have in common with them. For being so far away from this part of the world, I think it's more natural that neighbors would have a little bit more in common, even if they are extremely different people at the end of the day. But even if we're looking at another country smaller than the US, like Italy, if you look at the city of like Milano, and then you look at the city of Palermo, you're going to find very, very different people culturally, how warm they are, how open they are, and how you may get treated day to day, as well as the linguistic differences. You will find some people from the north of Italy who just don't understand people from Sicily. This is not saying anything, oh, one's bad or wrong. This is just saying a reality that sometimes even in Italy, you will see subtitles on TV, and it's not just closed captioning. But I would say when it comes to certain things that we can generalize to an extent, like what I was saying before, that even though the Portuguese and the Spanish may be very, very different, there are certain similarities between the cultures, and even Italy I would include in that, and some other Southern European nations as well, where there is a culture of working to live rather than living to work. Work-life balance, that ability to enjoy life at the end of the day and not just be working from before the sun even is out until after the sun is down. Yeah, there are people like me who may still do something like that and have an old-fashioned American work ethic, but it is still possible to be able to lay back and enjoy a little bit more than what you might be able to, at least for, I'm speaking really about work-life balance here, but maybe in a Northern European country, maybe a Scandinavian country or Germany. These countries have a very different life balance that people experience. And is that bad? No, it's just simply a different way of living. And one may agree with a certain type of person, and another may agree with another type of person. Whereas again, using Asia as an example, there could be aspects of life in that part of the world that may agree more with individuals than what you might find in Italy, Spain, and Portugal. But of course, as I've mentioned a number of times in past episodes of Not Your Average Globetrotter, wherever you go, you take yourself with you. So you do have to consider about what your comfort level is. And I would even say, to an extent, that maybe if you're going from like a small town, going to the polar opposite end into a major city in a different country with a different language, might not be the best choice to make. Whereas also, even if you're coming from a major city and you're looking to move to a village, that also could be something that could be tricky. So maybe making a move that might be a little bit smaller difference to allow yourself to get a little bit more accustomed to life in a different place. Of course, maybe you want to go to a city and have something exciting and different, but if you've never lived in a city before, you're not used to what a major city could offer you, and maybe even safety concerns that might come along with that, then it could be a bit overwhelming. But at the same time, there could be this aspect, like I was talking about before, you always bring yourself with you. So if you're coming from a small town in the US and you're looking at a small village, again, we'll just say Southern Europe, and you're really fed up with your little small town because of, say, a small-minded mentality that some people may have. And I'm not saying people from small towns are small-minded, but I've heard this complaint, and I'm speaking about a few specific examples of this, of people that I've spoken to over the years. But it's an example that I like to use because I really think it illustrates the point well, that if you're looking to change your life and have something new, that even though this may sound slightly contradictory to what I was talking about before, that maybe you shouldn't go for such a big difference, but having some difference could be worthwhile, that if you are coming from that small town because you're fed up with people knowing all of your information. I mean, even I lived in a small town, and like if there was going to be some sort of news or drama or something, everybody around you knew about it. And maybe you even heard about it before it happened to you. Maybe even like in high school, a couple breaking up, everybody knew about it before it even happened. But at the same time, in a small town, people do kind of come closer together, but usually the people who are from there, again, a different discussion for a different day. But if you are going from small town America to small village Europe, are you digging yourself into the same hole, just a little deeper and a little further away from the original hole? That's something that I might wonder. So, of course, having a balance in your new location, in your new life, will definitely help you as time goes on. But then, of course, I guess talking about balancing, there's balancing the idea of renting versus buying. For some people, really, I would say in many cases, for most people, the advice that I got, that I've mentioned again in many episodes of Not Your Average Globetrotter, advice that I received from a real estate agent friend of mine is that you should live in a place maybe 2 years before thinking about buying there. The reason being is that in that 2 years, you will really understand like what the weather pattern could be like there and what the people are like. You'll figure out what stores that you like. You'll figure out your day-to-day routine and if it is actually compatible with you. Because of course, it's much easier to get rid of a rental than it is a property. And of course, in different parts of the world, being able to buy and sell property, you may have a market that works a little bit slower than what you could be accustomed to. I know I've seen many Americans that would invest in property elsewhere, expecting that they can flip it quickly when maybe they're buying in a part of the world where things move a bit more slowly. And I've heard plenty of stories, even again using Southeast Asia as an example, that they buy a place and then because it is such a more expensive property than what maybe the local population would normally be able to afford, that it becomes a very difficult property to be able to move because they bought it for an above market rate. They did renovations on it that made it even more valuable, but in the end, the property isn't even worth what they've put into it. So if they even can sell it, it would be at an extreme loss. So like I said, living in a place for a little while before investing, and this is what I was talking about earlier in the episode, in this week's comment question of the week, where can you imagine investing yourself? Where would you like to invest yourself? it's not just an emotional thing. It is also a financial thing. It is a physical thing. It is a life-changing experience that can sometimes be really amazing, eye-opening, and literally and figuratively broadening your horizons. And so that's why I'll say that even though it may not be for everybody, that I can say for a lot of people, it is an amazing experience. And I know for me, I'm very glad that I made that decision to go and have a different kind of adventure and push myself a little bit, maybe beyond my own comfort levels at times. And so I think this is going to be a great place to round this episode off. So with this being the final episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, at least for 2022, don't want to scare you too much. I want to say thank you for joining me for another year of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much to those of you who've been helping to make this possible. Really, it is because of you guys that I am able to continue with this and that I do keep continuing with this. And even if you aren't able to support this project, I do also appreciate those of you who take part in the conversation and leave the comments. There's so many names that I've recognized over the years. Some people who've come in, some people have left, but there have been a number of you who have stuck around. So I really do truly appreciate that. Thank you all so very, very much. Of course, as always, I'm Rafael de Furia. Stay safe, stay healthy out there. Have a happy, healthy, joyous, and prosperous 2023. And I will see you all next year. Later.